who we're waiting for today. Okay.
Kurt and Jessica, let me know when we're ready to go.
And there's Commissioner Finkeldye. Okay, so you ready for me to call it to order? All right. Call to order the November 19th Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board meeting. We'll get started today with our legal introductions. Jessica, or do we have someone to read that?
Yeah, Luke is going to read that for us.
Okay.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome everybody to the November 19th, 2020 Metropolitan... God, you'd think I'd know by now. All right, good afternoon and welcome everybody to the November 19th, 2020 Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board meeting. My name is Luke Mortensen and I will be facilitating the Zoom video portion of the meeting. I'll work alongside MPO Chair Michelle DeRusso and staff member Jessica Mortinger. They are both on remote video to facilitate the meeting proceedings. Currently, everybody should be muted so we can talk through the general ground rules for today's meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over that icon. This will make it easier for everyone to hear the meeting. Just remember, unlike myself, to unmute yourself if and when you want to speak. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking the video icon located next to the microphone. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on for the duration. If you are participating by phone, you can enter *6 to mute and unmute your phone. Somewhere on your Zoom screen, you will also see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker, gallery view tiles all of the meeting participants. A few reminders to ensure that the provisions of the Kansas Open Meeting Act are met. As participants, you must state your name and title each time you speak. Individuals who signed up in advance to provide public comments remotely will be called upon by name. When you are called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The chair will then call for in-person public comment for those who are physically present. Staff will direct the person to the podium to speak while following social distancing and safety protocols. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call on each member individually to provide their vote. Staff will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. I want to remind everyone again to please unmute yourself when you are not speaking, and at this point, I will turn it back over to the chair.
Okay. County Commissioner Michelle DeRusso. Jessica or Luke, do we have any public comment today?
No one has signed up online or in advance submitted written public comment outside our public comment periods that we'll talk about today. Luke, is there anyone in the room?
Luke Mortensen, Planning and Development Services. There's nobody in the room.
Okay. County Commissioner Michelle DeRusso, thank you. So first on our agenda, we have to approve our meeting minutes from October 15th. And do we have a motion to approve those?
Vice Mayor Finkeldye, motion, I'll move to approve the minutes.
We have a second?
Messina, Kansas DOT, second.
We'll proceed with a roll call vote. This is Jessica Mortinger, MPO staff. Kramer?
Aye.
DeRusso?
Aye.
Finkeldye?
Aye.
Messina?
Aye.
Shipley?
Aye.
Struckoff?
Aye.
Thank you. And Sands is absent today, so that motion carries on 6 to 0.
Okay. County Commissioner DeRusso, first item on our agenda is the 2021 Unified Plan Program. Jessica, are you? Is this?
Yes, I have every item on the agenda. Let me share my screen with you. All right, hopefully you can see that. We have prepared and put out for public comment from September 30th to October 30th a proposed 2021 Unified Planning Work Program. I was just going to highlight some of the major planning activities that we plan for 2021 and then review some of the comments we received in our staff responses that were attached to the agenda. We envision participation in the financial participation in some co-management of the consultant-led Lawrence Transit Route Redesign project in 2021. We're looking for approval finishing the countywide portion of the bikeway plan, working on developing some best practice guide and a framework between land use and transportation planning. That issue addresses some issues that arose, particularly in Lawrence with the Multimodal Transportation Commission, and exploring ways to improve walkability and or considerations about possible amendment to the major thoroughfares map, looking at street classifications. We are looking at a regional pedestrian plan update, participation in the continued ongoing ADA transition planning and implementation work, working with the City of Lawrence as they review their some developed proposed multimodal traffic impact study requirements. And then a bunch of our more typical stuff you see in terms of our annual T2040 performance reporting and data management amendments, regular amendments to our 2021 through 24 TIP that got approved last month, and then continued coordination and planning with our partners around safe routes to school, pedestrian and bikeway planning throughout the county. We also envision bringing together our stakeholders around that participated in the development of the Intelligent Transportation Systems Plan about 6 years ago to update and review that. We envision that to be kind of a minor update and this based on what we currently know, although something could arise in that process. That's a pretty ambitious work plan, but that's what we have planned for 2021 with our planning partners for transportation in Lawrence and Douglas County. I'd be happy to before I get ahead of myself. We received some public comments. These are all from the same member of the public. These were attached to the agenda also in the staff response. They mostly were pretty technical in nature in terms of some of the comments, but the ones that there's many around aviation planning. I found out through this process about 13 years ago, the MPO used to plan and include aviation products in our transportation improvement program. It's something that can be done, although really the MPO is focused on coordinating surface transportation planning, which is why you don't see us getting involved in aviation often, and particularly at MPOs across the country. There aren't a lot of intramodal connectivity issues in regards to passenger aviation here, as only the City of Lawrence has a general aviation airport, and there aren't a lot of coordinating regional issues that we envision kind of in that process. So many of our responses relate to that in terms of, while it could be a topical area we could coordinate in the long range plan, we believe there's adequate regional and or federal oversight currently already of aviation, and that it's unnecessary for us at this point, and really with our staff capacity, to track airport operations at a higher level. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, or address any of the other issues that were arisen, or any work we have planned.
County Commissioner DeRusso, are there any questions for Jessica? Comments? Nothing? Okay, everybody's nice and quiet. This is an action item. Do we have a motion to approve the 2021 Unified Planning Work Program and authorize the MPO Secretary to sign consolidated planning grant agreements?
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. I would say that Jessica, great work on this. It isn't an aggressive plan, but it looks good. And so I will make that motion, Michelle.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
This is Brian Kramer, Baldwin City Council. I second.
Okay, Jessica, roll.
Yes, Jessica Mortinger, MPO staff. I'll proceed to do a roll call vote. Kramer?
Aye.
DeRusso?
Aye.
Finkeldye?
Aye.
Messina?
Aye.
Shipley?
Aye.
Struckoff?
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. Thank you.
Unmute. County Commissioner DeRusso, the next item on our agenda is Safe Routes to School plans for Lawrence, Eudora, and Baldwin City.
Absolutely. So this is a bigger item, and I have a presentation that kind of covers the planning process and points out some of the differences between the different cities' planning works that we have participated in. These plans were out for public comment. And we'll review that comment and response that was attached to the agenda at a high level as we get to that point, as we seek approval for these plans today. We began this, sorry, just a second, there we go. We began the Safe Routes to School, there we go. We began the Safe Routes to School process in the winter of 2019, and we'll talk about that timeline a little bit more in a second. And we really, for Lawrence particularly, we're continuing on from the 2014 implementation. However, from that planning process, there was never a formal citywide plan written, and really there was a continued need to establish some outcomes around the working group to continue making progress. Also the Eudora and Baldwin City work that had been done really lacked some current plans at some of the current school sites. So we developed this plan in partnership, the MPO, all of the cities, public health, the Lawrence Douglas County Sustainability Office, and each of the school districts throughout our communities. And it really provides us an opportunity to provide a comprehensive evaluation around safe routes. I think we found most commonly people talk about built environment in the engineering component, but we really know from the data-driven processes nationwide and the National Safe Routes to School program that a more holistic approach is effective at getting kids safer routes and education about biking and walking to school. We also believe this supports these plans are required for transportation alternatives funding, and hopefully will help our region move forward in continuing to implement the plans that we have worked on. Like I mentioned, this has been about a 15-month planning process. We envision bringing these plans to you in the spring. However, we've paused because of COVID and finalized a process kind of this fall when school resumed again. We wanted to be sensitive to what was happening in communities, and we recognize still that even though students aren't in all of our schools full time, we wanted to not lose the progress we had made because we had a robust amount of time creating these plans and doing the engagement that we did, even though students aren't currently in classes in person. This process we're going to kind of walk through as we go through this plan to show you what we developed for each part of the framework. The national framework has really been focused around 5 E's, which had traditionally been education, encouragement, engineering, enforcement, and evaluation. Equity is one that has been recently added. I think there's been conversation about fair and equitable outcomes for students. And then this year, in the spring, with the sensitivity to what was happening in the community in terms of national conversations around equity, enforcement was removed by the National Safe Routes to School Partnership as a required part of Safe Routes to School framework, and they added engagement instead. Really just trying to be sensitive to the fact that you need to listen to the community to understand where they stand on enforcement and how it impacts the community. And as we go through and talk about this, we'll find that enforcement really seems to be something that hits home in regards to all of the communities, because they spoke very heavily about user behavior, particularly driver behavior, and it was a large impact, either speed and volume of traffic in most places around allowing their kids to bike and walk to school. So we left it in the plan, but we make this note that if the community didn't call for it, and I think we'll have to have sensitive conversations about what enforcement looks like in terms of how you pair that with education in a way that isn't punitive and to single populations of your community. We began this process in Lawrence in 2014, and these others in Eudora and Baldwin City in 2019 in the spring, of collecting travel tally data. This is self-supported or self-reported information that students are responding to a question the teacher asks in the classroom at a certain point in time. In 2009, nationally, about 13% of K through 8 students biked and walked to school. You can see how Lawrence's data has changed over time and how that relates district-wide in Baldwin City and Eudora. One of the things that we pay particular attention to that I'm sure we'll be interested to track over time is how, as things are built and some of these interventions are conducted, how that impacts walking and biking. But you can see there's some fluctuation. We find fall walking and biking numbers are generally higher than spring numbers, and that's been pretty consistent across the board. This is just kind of insightful. And later in some of the goals that each of the communities have around percentages of kids that we envision for outcomes to walk and bike to school. In Lawrence specifically, another part of the school gathering was doing a comprehensive evaluation of all the crossing guard locations, 23 existing locations. And as a result of that, we found that many of the current crossing guard locations don't meet the current warrants set out in the school area traffic control policy. So we evaluated the policy and found that it was pretty consistent. It exceeds a little bit of the KDOT standard in terms of standards. And so we believe there needs to be continued conversation, probably particularly with the Lawrence City Commission, about what that means to the future of evaluating sites for crossing guards. We also evaluated some potential crossings and found that some of the ones we evaluated would meet the warrants. And so we really realized and make recommendations in this plan about a more robust, regular rotating evaluation of crossing guard locations as part of the conversation. We also have some recommendations about evaluating possibly some volunteer role in terms of, or of helping fill some of the staffing challenges around crossing guards. Another part of our data gathering was a parent survey that was issued, and this kind of shows you all of the responses. And of course, like every plan, the MPO puts together the entire inventory of public comments can be found in our public participation appendices. But we wanted to highlight really the top 3 barriers that we were looking at as we started to draft strategies. You can see in Lawrence that speed and volume of traffic. I included 4 here because we can't fix weather or climate, but safety or intersections and crossings popped up also as a thing. And then in Eudora, and in Baldwin City, you can see presence of sidewalk or pathway, safeties of intersections and crossing, amount of traffic, distance, and speed were kind of similar things that popped up that you can imagine as schools get farther away, distance becomes a little more of an issue. We recognize that although this process for Lawrence particularly began in 2014, there wasn't necessarily a unified document that kind of documented the progress that has been made since then. And we wanted to recognize that as we began this process, because there's been significant investment, not only in the built environment, but also in programming. And so we highlight a little bit of that. It's a huge step that over 1,600 4th and 5th graders in USD 497 get to participate in annual bike education, and there's been about 4.25 miles of sidewalk gap installed or pending as of the documenting of this plan. And we felt like that's pretty huge when you start to look at some of the goals and evaluations. We wanted to show this too as we communicated continued progress and work on this plan. For all of the communities, we went through a process to evaluate routes. We know that the need is significant in all of the communities in terms of sidewalk crossing improvement gaps. And it's unreasonable and unrealistic to think that the entire network is going to be built out. And so we really want to prioritize and focus our resources in the highest value places. And so these are just some examples. For every school, we got anonymized student addresses, and you can see we created density mapping on that right side there. And we looked at walk sheds of 1/2 mile, mile, and 1.5 miles to look at how we were kind of covering the walk sheds. These are 2 different schools that we have on here to kind of show this. But you can see as an example how the yellow current routes of the safe routes to school were impacted or changed based on student densities and or where there were greater densities, ensuring we could plan for future connections. And so this sort of thing was done. In a second, we can talk about there were some places where there were options about which route into a school we could take people, and we asked parents to respond to that where that was the case. We did the same thing in Baldwin City and Eudora with a series of routes, although they didn't have necessarily the same level of established routes. So we're looking at some different things here in terms of where sidewalks exist and what we're looking at for proposed routes in each of the plans. For public comment, we in terms of besides after the parent survey in Lawrence, we held an open house and we had pretty low attendance. And so as a result of that, our team had decided to go in that route. And as a result of that, realized we needed to do some additional work to engage the school communities. And so we put all of the packets that we had designed for the open house, school specific packets, and visited every site council, PTO or PTA, with a couple exceptions based on a snow day and not being invited to participate in for two elementary schools in Lawrence. But we felt like we got really good coverage, and we asked out of that packet very specific questions about routes, if that was appropriate. We asked about strategies and preferences for strategies. We asked about crossing guard preferences, how far they'd let students walk, different choices between some design options, like a yield roadway versus a more higher volume street, and then asked about other general comments that people had. And of course, that's documented throughout the plan, but also in our public engagement. For Eudora and Baldwin City, we tabled at parent-teacher conferences since there was a single schools we could go to instead of we couldn't make it to all the schools during the same. We don't have a big enough staff during all their parent-teacher conferences in Lawrence, but and we asked similar things about strategies and proposed routes, and asked about responses in terms of that. One of the main conversations I know that had happened locally in regards to from our previous Safe Routes to School plan is a conversation, particularly in Lawrence, about sidewalks on one side of the street versus both sides of the street, and then whether that mattered if it was on major streets, collector streets, or local streets. Recognizing we really need to prioritize resources, you can see pretty general consensus, 92% or 80%, that they should be on collector streets and our major streets on both sides of the streets. We saw a reasonably significant drop of about 30% when it got to local streets. And so even though it seemed like 53 was a majority, that significance of a drop in the conversation about resources really led us to have the conversation and the recommendation in the plan that sidewalk gap infill, particularly on safe routes to school routes as prioritized projects, should happen on both sides of collector and arterials and on a single side of local streets, as long as it's a continuous route. So there could be some places where sidewalk gets built on a second side, but it's about making a continuous route where you wouldn't want kids to cross back and forth. And I think this is something that we saw support from the Multimodal Transportation Commission for. Here's an example where I was talking about where some schools had alternative routes. There was about 8 schools where there might have been a student pocket of density, and it could have been option A or B to connect those two. And in all of these examples, the respondents to the survey weighed in on what their preferred route alternative was to get to the safe route network, and that we proceeded with final recommendations that were supportive of the feedback that we got from those schools. You can see that there's a lot of coverage of areas as we start to talk about recommendations, and I'll kind of go over these at a high level, but we framed our action plan around recommendations related to what we identified as these issues to kind of frame the conversation. And so we'll start and we'll go through these and talk about them. We recognize, as we talked about, traffic control in terms of user behavior, particularly driver behavior, was one of the largest concerns of parents from our survey responses and our engagement. And we really recognize the need to adopt the school area traffic control policy that was been written in 2015. We imagine needing to revise that a little bit based on the work that's been done in this process. We also found value in implementing the neighborhood traffic management program. Because we have so many schools that are in neighborhoods, we find great value to that work to our school Safe Routes plan. We recognized throughout this process that there was inconsistent information being given to parents about traffic circulation for each school site. Some schools had a circulation map that was given in a newsletter at one point in the year. Some had them in handbooks, some had them on the website, and we really recognized the need to establish some traffic circulation map component that goes along and complements an infrastructure map, which can be used for encouragement. And then also a planning map. So you'll kind of see that series of 3 maps as we work to implement the plan. And then, of course, enforcement of traffic laws around school zones continuing to be a benefit to lower the speed limit. We found, though, consistently in user behavior and kind of the call for enforcement and comfortable crossings it being an issue in all the communities. We talked about a few of those in the Lawrence list. Develop a crossing evaluation. This comes from the need to identify crossing projects that could be added to the non-motorized prioritization project list. And then we recognize both the crossing of K10 and Highway 56 in Eudora and Baldwin City have some more specific crossing consideration concerns and needs of planning work around scoping projects to make those crossings more comfortable for students. We talked a little bit about this, but particularly for the Lawrence program in Eudora and Baldwin City, we can encourage them to continue their crossing programs. In Lawrence, we believe that crossing guards should be placed along safe routes and should be evaluated on a timeline and process that's consistent with city budget, since it has city budget implications. And that would be a more regular evaluation of crossing guards that could happen like on a yearly rotation. And so we envision that as an implementation step that will need to be worked on after this plan is adopted. Constructing and maintaining routes in all of the communities. Everybody's in a little bit different place, but we put priority hopefully on safe routes to school infrastructure and to prioritize funding, particularly for those infill projects. We have goals in all of the communities around continuous networks. So for example, here in Baldwin City, the goal for 100% continuous sidewalk by 2025 along the safe routes. That with the existing and pending, Baldwin City is already at 90% because of the significant investment they've made in sidewalk infrastructure recently. And that remaining 10% equals about 1.1 miles. In Eudora, they're currently at 63% and they have about 2.5 miles to get to of missing sidewalk. So that gives you a little bit of scale and scope to compare where we are in the region. We recognize, particularly in Lawrence, and recommend that there be a developed MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, between the city and the USD 497 to detail how safe routes will operate. We know one has been drafted and debated probably around 2015 or 2016 and got stuck in legal, and we believe that should get picked up, dusted off. We believe there should be some edits. We've looked at it and made some of those suggestions based on the planning work that we've done. But there needs to be an MOU, and we believe there needs to be a formal Safe Routes to School working group. We formed kind of a working group to do the steering of this plan, but really there needs to be continued engagement and coordination to implement much of this school, these programs and policies consistently. We found around the cultural things, there's we're working currently with public health as an example, who's working with USD 497 and hopes to roll out to the other Eudora and Baldwin City school districts, some pedestrian safety education, and then the continuation of walk and bike to school days and other encouragement programs as they're appropriate after students return to school in person. There's a lot of other walking and bike biking cultural recommendations around some ideas of integrating bicycle-friendly driver training into driver education. Here we talked about a little bit further down the list, simple encouragement maps, and a guide for creating or establishing walking school buses and bike trains as a solution for kind of improving crossings and children who may be traveling alone to be able to get the benefit of having the cultural element of traveling with other students. The plan we really envision to set a tone for doing some of this work on a more regular basis to track our progress, including the student travel tallies, to continue those in all the communities, and conduct a parent survey every 5 years when we would envision likely a plan update would be needed, and then more an inventory of all of the infrastructure so we can track where things are for the maps that we're looking at making. Some other best practices we looked about, of course, is about citing schools and considering walkability and bikeability, and also working with public health to appoint school champions at each of the schools to really be the leader at the school-specific sites to engage schools around some of the cultural changes needed. We talked a little bit about this, so we envision kind of a process every 5 years to update these plans and the routes. We believe there can be a process in the school area traffic control policy to be when a school boundary or a school route may need to be amended outside of a plan update process, and we envision that kind of around either significant land use changes that would impact student population densities and or school boundary changes. And so we kind of lay out that framework for what that looks like. The Lawrence Plan goals are looking at increasing biking and walking to 20% from 17.8, and increase completed sidewalks along safe routes to 95% for elementary and 92% for middle school by 2025. You can see how that compares to the Eudora and Baldwin City numbers I presented earlier. And then the sidewalk gap infill goals. And for Eudora, that looks like increasing biking and walking to 11%. That'd be about 81 more students from their current 9.1%. And we talked about the infrastructure earlier, and then we called out specifically the crossing improvements that are needed in both of these communities because they have students crossing highways, particularly uncontrolled, in travel lanes or in basically curbside situations, and we believe those are critical safety components to improving walking and biking. In Eudora specifically, and in Baldwin City, we're looking at improving comfort of crossings along 56. And you can see here, we're looking at a 15% goal for biking and walking, where they're currently at 31 or 13.1, which equates to about 61 more students in that process. So this is the part everybody's most interested in seeing generally when we talk about safe routes, is what does that look like? Here's the entirety of the proposed safe route network in Lawrence. And in Eudora, we have some alignment options here that can be we believe are some possible alternatives around that, a crossing over K10 that will need to be future conversations between Eudora and KDOT. But you can see they have a lot more network to build. And then Baldwin City, when they get to their goal, in terms, you can see where their existing sidewalk or pending sidewalk, orange is pending, green is existing. They had many sections that they were working on constructing that will fill a lot of their one side gaps. In Lawrence, when we can't put all that condition information like we could in the other communities. And so we show that here, what that means for projects in terms of here, based on the goals for both sides of collector and arterial or one side of local streets, here would be these projects, and it identifies the pending projects on there as well. And then we recognize that while most elementary students are probably biking on sidewalks to school, there are some middle school situations. And we aligned with the updated bikeway plan, Lawrence Bikes plan, to identify locations where there was consistent alignments between the bikeway plan and safe routes to identify projects that can be used in that list. During the public comment period, We received comments, and I posted those all in the agenda. And of course, we can go through them. Many of them were things we heard during the public process, some of which we felt like the plan addressed, and we noted that. Some of which things related to crossing guard placement, which we also noted that there needs to be additional work on some of that. You can see overall general support and consensus around that, and the number next to the community is kind of the number of responses we got at this point in the process. It's lower than the number of participants we had overall, but we felt like it was a pretty good sampling of some of the things we heard to continue to reiterate where that there's support for safe routes and kind of where that lies. I have and attached to the agenda, you could see all of the comments we received during the comment period based on the question we asked and our response, and whether or not we made a change in the plan. And there were some both grammatical things and a few places where we made edits to make the plan more clear or to clarify. And this exists for all of the communities in terms of how we felt the comment could it wouldn't be impacted by the plan. Okay, back to this is our timeline for approvals. We have, after your consideration today, a remaining conversation with the Lawrence City Commission, Eudora City Commission, and the Baldwin City Council. And we then will follow that up, hopefully, with school board conversation. In the future, at future meetings, we went in person already once to present in Baldwin City, and so the introduction to kind of this planning process, and so we'll continue carrying that process forward. But I'd be happy to entertain any questions or conversation you might have. I drug you through a lot of our process. Hopefully it was insightful to get us where we got to a final draft plan for your consideration today.
County Commissioner Drew. So Jessica, thank you. That's a lot of great information and I mean, a lot of hard work. I mean, you know, you guys have been working on this for quite a while, and I think you did a great job of wrapping it up for us. Are there any questions or comments for Jessica?
Yeah, Matt Messina, KDOT. I would just like to reiterate, especially the in-house job that was done for this. It's outstanding. But related to the school champion, I know that you kind of mentioned that would be more of like a parent or a volunteer role. Was there any discussion of that actually being a funded position with like the health department or any type of community staff? Because that would be an eligible expense through federal funding programs.
With the nature of the number of schools, that wasn't the conversation. I know public health has funded through other grants previously, other partnerships with city staff, and they're currently using KDHE funding for some other work they're doing around like working with schools to develop curriculum and education. I think it could be a conversation in the community. I think the team really felt like some of the biggest gap, besides getting a working, like without a working group going, is that some of the events at the schools, because each school is so autonomous, it would be really hard to do at a district level. In some sense, that's kind of how we've done it so far, and that it really would benefit from having more engagement from PTO, PTA, or kind of like the school champion. And so we went in that direction. I think a future working group could determine we eventually get to a point where they would want to pursue staff, and that would be consistent with advancing some of the goals in the plan.
And the other one that I had was that most of the drafts that we've seen for the next transportation bill that relates to TA and SRTS would expand K through 12. So I know that you kind of mentioned that you have the updates and amendments opportunities, but I mean, that's just something that could easily be right around the corner of us being well aware that that would be a need and to be incorporated very soon.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, that would be a welcome change to the legislation. I think there's a lot of interest. We opted really to go through the K through 8, which was an ambitious process on its own. I think the cultural around the high schools we could see as a separate process if we identified that as something we want to do. I know that's something we could talk about in our pedestrian plan because maybe it includes a little less specific work related to safe routes, but also just better prioritization and gap infill in terms of sidewalk condition and or transit conversation. So I see a lot of planning opportunities in 2021 around transit route restructuring and our pedestrian plan that could also impact high school travel. I know we've had conversations about safe routes to parks, safe routes to high schools, safe routes to bus stops in terms of how we're going to engage the conversation around our pedestrian plan. But that would be good to know, and I think it'll be a welcome addition to the federal program.
This is Commissioner Shipley. The discussion that you said multimodal had about where to put sidewalks on local streets. Would I be able to watch that discussion they had? Is that the November 2nd transportation meeting you were talking about? I don't want to question it here.
We have,
watch it.
I don't recall specifically at the last presentation. I think in general they've supported that consensus. I presented to them at the one before that, and I think that's where we had a little more specific engagement about it. I'd have to look too, but in general, that's been the conversation that staff has had with that group over time in terms of prioritization, just recognizing that for many local streets, one side is probably adequate, considering there are many residential streets in our communities that students live on that have sidewalks on neither side of the street. And just because they're not a safe route doesn't mean that there aren't students walking on them. The safe route infrastructure, I mean, the reality is that a student lives on every street in our community. And the reality is we can't infill all of that. So how do we start prioritizing funneling kids to that? I would say some of the work also around for all of the schools, particularly looking at them as destinations in terms of prioritizing sidewalk improvements like condition is going to also be really important. It's something this plan doesn't really cover because each of the communities has handled that differently, kind of as a separate process. But some of the work being done on that will probably also help some of those priority conversations. For your information, though, just about the conversation that we had with Multimodal Transportation Commission, they had some good general questions. The biggest kind of point of contention that they particularly had the most, I felt, discussion about was they felt like there was an inadequate in that the working group basically inadequately addressed busing transport because of the number of comments, like not city busing, school busing, because the number of comments were about basically the school district following state law, which only reimburses for busing outside of 2.5 miles. They felt like there was inadequate work done around recommendations to possibly do a pay-as-you-ride kind of busing solution for students, or kind of getting at that basically getting transit riders that way would still be better. To get students on the bus might be better than a single occupant vehicle and possibly more equitable in some situation. I know we had conversations more privately with the working group around school boundary changes are often impacted based on student populations they want to be able to bus. So in some cases, there are boundary area decisions where they intentionally set a boundary where students will be outside of a 2.5 mile radius, so they would be eligible for busing to make those equity decisions. That could obviously be impacted by future boundary discussions also, and or changes to state law. It really felt outside of our scope, and it wasn't something that the working group it was like, here's the law, and that's what it is. So I think the answer to some of that about where we go from here is this is an ongoing process, and that's why we really need a working group that has coordinated, formalized recognition from the city and the school board to have, coordinated work, whether that's 2 or 4 meetings a year to kind of can make sure that these products and processes are updated regularly and maintained, to make sure that we really recognize safe routes to school is not a one-time thing. You don't get to write a plan and say you do safe routes to school. And I think that's the thing a lot of communities maybe miss. Matt's smirking a little, but I think, a lot of people write a plan and you say, okay, we have a plan now, let's implement the built environment stuff. And it really is about a more robust program that's more than just built environment.
County Commissioner DeRusso, are there any other questions for Jessica? Okay, Jessica, if I'm reading this correctly, this looks like this is going to be 3 different motions. Is that correct?
We set it up that way. Yes, Jessica Mortinger, MPO staff, we set it up that way so you would have the option to do that kind of as each motion for each plan.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions or comments, we'll go ahead. Do we have a motion to approve the Lawrence Safe Routes to School plan?
Planning Commissioner Eric Struckoff, so moved.
Vice Mayor Finkel, second.
Okay, Jessica Mortinger, MPO staff will proceed to do a roll call vote. Kramer,
Aye.
DeRusso,
Aye.
Finkeldye,
Aye.
Messina,
Aye.
Shipley,
Aye.
Struckoff.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the Eudora Safe Routes to School plan?
Planning Commissioner Eric Struckoff, so moved.
We have a second?
Vice Mayor Finkel, second. So I'll give Brian a chance there, but that's okay.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We'll proceed to do a roll call vote. Kramer,
Aye.
DeRusso,
Aye.
Finkeldye,
Aye.
Messina,
Aye.
Shipley,
Aye.
Struckoff.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the Baldwin City Safe Routes to School plan?
Councilmember Kramer, so moved.
We have a second?
Vice Mayor Finkel, second.
Moved and seconded.
We'll proceed to do a roll call vote. MPO staff Jessica Mortinger, Kramer,
Aye.
DeRusso,
Aye.
Finkeldye,
Aye.
Messina,
Aye.
Shipley,
Aye.
Struckoff.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So moving on to our next action item, the 2021 Safety Target Setting.
Yes. All right. So our annual work to set federally required safety targets. We, during this process, discussed our crash data, had an opportunity for public comment based on our draft targets that we set out, and had that, we discussed that with you at November TAC and Policy Board. We'll go back through these at a high level, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have. We looked at this year based on a request of TAC members. The data, not only the data, but the geographic distribution of it. And in a minute, we'll show you the owner of the road information. One of the predominant things that we found to happen when we looked at just the geographic area and where it was placed is crashes that were attributed, possibly the largest percentage of these probably was crashes that were attributed really on KDOT facilities was being mapped as Douglas County, which gave a perception that there was a larger safety issue in Douglas County when it was just in that geographic area and it was a predominance on KDOT facilities. So I'll show you that in a second, but this kind of shows you throughout the county for 2019, the location of the fatalities in the region, and you can see they're dispersed, and you can see where there's a predominance of locations really that are in proximity to each other. And so we're hoping as we begin to dive into this data and work to identify how we can meet the targets that we have set and be more ambitious in improving safety in our region, that providing this information and conversation with particularly our TAC partners on the Technical Advisory Committee can give us an opportunity to dive in a little more deeply, or that they can dive in a little more deeply to some of this crash reporting. They have it available to them. They use it when they apply for federal funds like Highway Safety Improvement Program and or doing other reconstruction projects. The state also is using it while they're looking at many of the K-10 related projects they're looking at. Here's the crashes for serious injuries, and you can kind of see how they're dispersed in location. Now this is all crashes where a motor vehicle is involved, so it can also include non-motorized, and we look at those in a little bit separately. Here's where I was talking about ownership, where spatially just dependent on where it's distributed doesn't necessarily tell you whose facility it is. And so for an example, based on the fatal crashes, you can see kind of who has roadway ownership, where a couple of those might look like they're in either Eudora or the county, but they're on KDOT facilities. And so that kind of explains that on this data table. When you look at it over the 5-year period, you can see particularly 5 out of 12 and some that are on map 5 out of 12 were KDOT. And so this kind of allows us to, in the tip, look at the recommendations of the projects that are being proposed and how we're planning to address them. So we feel like this is kind of valuable to dive in a little more to in terms of looking at where we can find solutions where there's a predominance of crashes that likely occur in a similar situation if they have similar extenuating circumstances. Here's that same thing for serious injuries in terms of roadway ownership. And that kind of just gives you an idea. We can pair those together. Again, you can see 7 out of the 27 where we didn't have attributed any previously to KDOT. They have some that are on their roadways. And so we just want to continue to have that conversation when we look at, you can see even there's a private road, or the townships, and townships have some road ownership there in terms of looking at who would be responsible for possible safety improvement projects. And these are the crash types. TAC asked us to dig in a little more, so I included this for your information in terms of this is where you can really see where the non-motorized show up across the map, but also what other types of, if there's fixed object or overturned vehicle, or what other considerations are involved in some of those crash reports based on that. So here's the non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. You can see similarly we have a downward trend minus a spike in 2017. And so we're looking into some of that. When we get to the performance measures, you can see our number of fatalities for 2019 almost doubled over 2018. And so that resulted in an increase of where we project both our 2020 fatality crash rate to be at, and also our 5-year rolling average increases. And so this we have at 10.9. We have the rate of fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. You can see that the crashes even increased over the rate of VMT as that's happening. And I think that's kind of what we're hearing in national data is maybe what we're going to expect in 2020 as well. But that raises that 5-year average. And as a result, our 2021 target in terms of where we anticipate will be. Our serious injuries seems to kind of plateaued a little bit, and so it's not seeing the more significant decreases we've seen over the last 5 years, and that leaves us with a 27.3 5-year average target. If we have a 20, with our estimated 26 serious injuries. The rate of serious injuries per VMT, you can see, is raising a little bit, but still lower than it had been 5 years ago. And so people are driving, but less crashes. And we anticipate this is what nationally they're talking about is VMT was down for overall for the year, but that crashes were still up. So we'll be watching to see what happens in this 2020 number for Douglas County. And then here's both our 5-year average and our reality for non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, a reduction overall from where we've been in terms of course, this one will be we always, this one is interesting because we don't have a comparison for usage to compare it to like VMT with vehicles. So if there's more people out, that obviously poses more opportunity for interactions and risk. And so we kind of see that number fluctuate in that regard. Those are the 5 targets that we have set, that we are required to set and report on. You see more of those as we talk about TIP program projects. We're working more also, I'll just point out, particularly in Lawrence, on working to coordinate some of the reporting and data we do around performance for transportation, particularly safety, to talk about strategic plan. We talk a lot about the TAC had a pretty large conversation about the ability for the MPO to impact safety targets in terms of being a non-transportation management area MPO. We don't get set aside funding where we can choose projects and set criteria to tackle specific issues. And so as we had that conversation, we were hoping that having more direct and coordinated goals and strategies with all of our city communities will be really important to drive conversations around safety and funding and prioritizing safety projects to make impacts. And so those are conversations we have every year. Of course, we also have the report where we've added the previous comment we've talked about where we desire a decreasing trend in crashes, although our targets are set more realistically based on our 5-year projections. And since we haven't seen significant necessarily project investment related to specific safety projects, there's some anecdotal safety improvements that are made with projects, we don't feel comfortable at this time projecting targets that are lower than kind of where we see the status quo being in terms of investments. Kind of that continued trend. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have about this, about our targets and where they go and how they are used.
County Commissioner DeRusso. Thank you, Jessica. Are there any questions or comments on this agenda item? No? Okay, then do we have a motion to approve the 2021 safety targets?
Vice Mayor Finkelstein, so moved.
Do we have a second?
Planning Commissioner Eric Struckhoff, seconded.
Okay, moved and seconded.
Jessica Morringer, MPO staff, will proceed to a roll call vote. Kramer?
Aye.
DeRusso?
Aye.
Finkeldie?
Aye.
Messina?
Aye.
Shipley?
Aye.
Struckhoff?
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0.
County Commissioner DeRusso. Okay, it looks like we have, you have some updates for us, Jessica?
We do. So I'm going to share a screen really quickly. We've heard a lot of anecdotal reports about increased biking and walking as a result of COVID and the impacts particularly. And during lockdown, we partnered with Friends of Lawrence Area Trails to conduct some replica counts to counts we had done in the spring of 2017 for a health impact assessment. And overall, when we look at the average and projections for weekday and weekend, we didn't necessarily see an overall increase in users. This takes basically 6 hours of count data at every location, and there's a methodology that allows us to project usage. You can see, however, that each of these locations during the weekday, some of them had very significant increases in the number of users, whereas the weekend we saw less users. In some of the data, by the time we got to count the weekend dates because of some weather, it was hotter days, so we thought that could be part of it. We speculate a little bit that possibly people are choosing less popular routes on weekends, and that's why we didn't see people in these trails. And that's supported by, we got a demo by a private software company that uses cell phone data, and they had some pedestrian trip making, and we did see some of that, that even that in April compared 2019 to 2020, that the locations where peaks are changing, and it's focused a lot more on neighborhoods. Of course, the walking trips that are accounted for in grocery stores also put some spikes on the map, which we thought were fascinating. But this just kind of shows you, and we're continuing to kind of track this in terms of how it impacts both the potential demand we could see for biking and walking infrastructure and how that continues post-COVID. I think there's a lot of interest for people to get outside, both for health, mental health, and just well-being, whether you're walking to a destination or not, in terms of utilitarian purposes. And so we're going to continue. We're doing some in partnership with public health and MSO at the City of Lawrence. They purchased some video counters, and we are collecting some 12-hour counts at some of these locations so we can better understand how the peaks in the day have changed and whether or not we need to change our count times to better do some manual counts. But we'll continue to track this information like our bike ped count information, because we find it to be pretty valuable to our conversations around biking and walking. Okay, what was the next update on the agenda? Yes, we've attached recent TAC minutes, and I also have for you attached to the agenda and here the monthly KDOT updates. Matt, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, thank you, Matt Messina, KDOT. I did want to add that this has been updated since this version to share the announcements made related to the most recent rounds of cost share and our new innovative technology program. And though nobody in your area was awarded funds for either of those programs at this round, it would be worth still looking at just because it'll give you an idea of what type of projects are eligible and successful within those programs. Other than that, everything else on here remains to be very relevant and useful. So that's, Jessica, that is still available on that link that I shared earlier, and that'll continue to get updated every week or two.
We attached it, but maybe we'll also include the link. Okay, that's all the quick updates I have. We'd be happy to entertain any questions anyone might have.
County Commissioner DeRusso, are there any questions or comments? See, Jessica, you've done such a fantastic job of covering this. Nobody has any questions. Other business.
So I have Jessica Morringer, MPO staff. I have one item we wanted to call your attention to for the federal fiscal year 21 TIP that you entertained last month that we approved. We issued a request to post a public notice to LJ World on August 26th, but in error, it was not published. And we figured that out when we were working on our billing and didn't have a affidavit with our cost estimate in terms of getting billed for it. We wanted to let you know that's not a federal requirement, but that's something we've committed to in our public participation plan, is posting that legal notice in the newspaper. We still did have our 30-day public comment period. It was posted online, emailed to 1,100 plus people on our MPO listserv, available on our website, and at 5 locations in person throughout the county. In the future, we're committed to ensuring we have that affidavit before the document is reviewed and published by you. But we wanted to notify you of this error because it was not us not meeting our obligation that we intend to meet in our public participation plan. We have notified KDOT and the feds and also of this, so that way we can hopefully have transparency about it because it was not our intent not to publish it.
County Commissioner DeRusso, thank you, Jessica, for that update. Okay. So it looks like we have one more meeting this year on December 17th. Is that correct?
Yes, Jessica Mortinger, MPO staff. We anticipate having a meeting in December. We'll keep it pretty short. We recognize it's right before the holidays. We, at this point in time, are looking at establishing some steering committees to begin some of the work that we plan to do in 2021 so we can get right off the bat, get those processes started. That's what we have right now on the agenda.
Okay. County Commissioner DeRusso, if there isn't anything else, anybody else want to add anything? No. Okay. Move to adjourn. Everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.